What happens when Hollywood royalty meets daytime television's most fearless interrogators? You won't believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle faces off against The View's powerhouse panel in what becomes one of the most explosive confrontations in talk show history. This isn't your typical celebrity interview. This is a full-blown verbal battlefield where pleasantries are abandoned and gloves come off completely. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these titans clash in an epic showdown that had viewers across America glued to their screens. The tension was palpable from the moment Meghan Markle walked onto the View set. Something felt different about this appearance. There was an electric charge in the air that veteran viewers could sense immediately. Whoopi Goldberg sat center stage with her trademark stern expression, while Joy Behar flanked her left with that mischievous glint in her eye that usually preceded her most cutting remarks. Sunny Hostin and Sarah Haynes completed the formidable quartet, both armed with research folders that seemed unusually thick for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview. Meghan entered wearing an immaculate cream-colored blazer, her signature confident smile firmly in place. But even the most casual observer could detect something beneath the surface, a defensiveness that hadn't been there in her previous media appearances. The audience applauded politely, but the energy felt restrained, almost cautious, as if everyone sensed they were about to witness something extraordinary. "Welcome back to The View," Whoopi began, her voice carrying that authoritative tone that commanded immediate attention. "We're here with Meghan Markle, and we've got some questions that I think America has been waiting to hear answered." The camera caught a subtle shift in Meghan's posture, her shoulders straightening almost imperceptibly, her smile becoming slightly more forced. Joy wasted no time diving into controversial territory. "Meghan, let's talk about your recent comments regarding the royal family. You've made some pretty serious allegations, but many people are wondering, where's the proof? You've painted yourself as this victim, but critics say you knew exactly what you were getting into when you married into the world's most famous monarchy." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan's media training kicked in as she maintained her composure, but viewers could see her grip tighten slightly on her coffee mug. "Joy, I think that's a very unfair characterization of my experience. I've always been transparent about the challenges I faced, and I've never claimed to be a victim. I've simply shared my truth about what it was like to navigate an institution that many people don't fully understand." "Your truth," Sunny interjected, leaning forward with laser focus. "But what about the palace's truth? They released statements contradicting several of your claims. Staff members who worked closely with you have come forward with very different accounts of events. How do you reconcile that discrepancy?" The temperature in the room seemed to rise several degrees. Meghan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. "I find it interesting that people are so quick to believe palace statements when it serves their narrative, but when I speak about my own lived experiences, suddenly there's a credibility issue. These are the same people who remained silent when I was being torn apart in the British press." Sarah Haynes jumped in with surgical precision. "But that's exactly the point some people are making. You've built a brand around speaking your truth. But critics argue that your version of events keeps evolving. First it was about media treatment, then it was about racism within the royal family, then it was about being silenced. Which is it really, and why should viewers believe this version over previous ones?" The panel was operating like a well-oiled machine, each host seamlessly building on the previous question, creating an increasingly uncomfortable situation for their guest. Meghan's public relations training was being put to the ultimate test, as she found herself defending not just her actions, but her very credibility on national television. "I think what you're failing to understand," Meghan replied, her voice gaining an edge that hadn't been there moments before, "is that these weren't separate issues. They were all interconnected. The media treatment was influenced by racial bias. The institution's response was about maintaining their image at my expense. And yes, I was silenced when I tried to address these issues through proper channels." Whoopi leaned back in her chair, studying Meghan with the intensity of a prosecutor sizing up a witness. "Here's what I'm struggling with, and I think a lot of our viewers are too. You had access to resources, support systems, and platforms that most people facing discrimination could only dream of. You had Prince Harry, you had legal teams, you had PR experts. Yet you're telling us you were powerless? That doesn't add up for a lot of people. The words hit like a verbal slap. Meghan's composure cracked slightly, a flash of genuine anger, breaking through her carefully maintained facade. So because I had resources, I should have just accepted being treated unfairly? Because I'm married into privilege, I forfeit the right to speak out against injustice? That's exactly the kind of thinking that perpetuates these problems. Joy sensed blood in the water and moved in for another strike. But here's the thing, Meghan, a lot of people see this as you wanting to have your cake and eat it too. You wanted the royal titles, the prestige, the global platform, but when it came with responsibilities and constraints you didn't like, you walked away while keeping all the benefits. Can you understand why that might rub people the wrong way? The accusation landed with devastating effect. For the first time since the interview began, Meghan seemed genuinely rattled. Her hands moved restlessly in her lap, and her smile disappeared entirely. That is such a reductive way to look at the situation, and frankly, it's insulting. You're suggesting that I should have remained in a situation that was damaging to my mental health and well-being just to satisfy public expectations. But the hosts weren't backing down. This was the View at its most relentless, for experienced interviewers, who had built their careers on asking the questions others wouldn't dare ask. They sensed their guests' growing discomfort and seemed to feed off it, each question becoming more pointed than the last. The commercial break couldn't come soon enough, but when the cameras stopped rolling, the tension in the studio remained thick enough to cut with a knife. Meghan sat rigidly in her chair, no longer bothering to maintain her media-friendly demeanor when she thought no one was watching. The hosts huddled together, clearly strategizing their approach for the next segment. What none of them realized was that they had only scratched the surface of what would become a confrontation for the ages. When the cameras rolled again, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Gone was any pretense of a friendly celebrity chat. This was now a full-scale interrogation, and everyone in the studio could feel it. Meghan returned to her seat with her jaw set in a hard line, her previous diplomatic smile replaced by barely concealed irritation. The hosts exchanged knowing glances. They had drawn blood, and they weren't about to let up now. "Welcome back," Whoopi announced, her voice carrying an ominous undertone. "We're here with Meghan Markle, and we're having what I think is a very necessary conversation about accountability and truth-telling." The word truth-telling landed like a verbal grenade, and Meghan's eyes flashed with unmistakable anger. Joy picked up exactly where they had left off, but with even sharper precision. "Meghan, during the break, you seemed pretty upset by our questions. But I have to ask, if you're going to make your living telling your story publicly, don't you think you should be prepared to defend that story when people have legitimate questions about inconsistencies?" Inconsistencies. Meghan's voice rose slightly, her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. "What inconsistencies? I've been completely consistent about my experiences. Just because my truth doesn't align with what some people want to believe doesn't make it inconsistent." Sunny leaned forward aggressively, her legal training evident in her prosecutorial approach. "Let's talk specifics then. In your Oprah interview, you claimed you were suicidal and received no help from the royal institution. But palace sources, and we verified this, say you were offered multiple resources including counseling services, which you declined. How do you explain that contradiction?" The question hit like a lightning bolt. Meghan's face flushed visibly, and for a moment, she seemed genuinely speechless. When she finally responded, her voice had an edge that hadn't been there before. "Those palace sources weren't in my shoes. They weren't living my experience. The help they claim they offered came with conditions and restrictions that would have made my situation worse, not better." "What conditions?" Sarah pressed immediately, not giving Meghan a chance to regroup. "Because from the outside, it looks like you were offered genuine help and chose not to take it, then later claimed you were abandoned. That's a pretty serious accusation to make if it's not entirely accurate." The room was electric with tension. Meghan shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her hands clenching and unclenching. "You're twisting everything I've said. This is exactly what I mean about being attacked when I try to tell my truth. I'm sitting here being interrogated like I'm on trial, instead of having a conversation. But you are on trial. In a way," Whoopi said bluntly, her trademark directness cutting through any remaining pretense. "You've made very serious accusations against one of the world's most respected institutions. You've claimed racism, neglect, and systematic mistreatment. Those aren't light accusations, and people have every right to examine them closely. Meghan's mask was slipping fast. Her voice became sharper, more defensive. So I should just stay? Quiet? Accept mistreatment because questioning it makes people uncomfortable? That's exactly the mentality that allows these systems to continue operating unchecked. Joy seized the moment with ruthless efficiency. Nobody's saying you should stay quiet, but people are saying your story keeps changing. First, Harry was your protector. Then suddenly, he was complicit in your mistreatment. First, the royal family welcomed you. Then they were racist from day one. Which version should we believe? My story hasn't changed. Meghan snapped, her voice rising to a level that made everyone in the studio take notice. What's changed is people's willingness to listen without prejudice. You're doing exactly what the British media did, twisting my words and creating contradictions that don't exist. The hosts sensed they had hit a nerve and pressed their advantage. Sunny jumped back in with devastating precision. Let's talk about the British media then. You've claimed they treated you differently than Kate Middleton, but side-by-side comparisons show the coverage was actually quite similar. Both of you faced intense scrutiny. The difference is Kate never publicly complained about it or used it as a platform for victimhood. The comparison to Kate Middleton was clearly a trigger point. Meghan's entire demeanor shifted, her professional facade crumbling before the cameras. Victimhood? You think speaking out against actual racism and discrimination is playing victim? This is unbelievable. I came here expecting to have an adult conversation, not to be ambushed and gaslit on national television. Nobody's gaslighting you, Whoopi countered firmly. We're asking legitimate questions that millions of Americans want answered. If your story is true, then defend it with facts, not emotion. Sarah moved in for another calculated strike. Here's what's confusing viewers, Meghan. You say you want privacy and to be left alone, but you've done multiple high-profile interviews. You have lucrative media deals. You're constantly in the spotlight. How do you reconcile wanting privacy while simultaneously courting publicity? Meghan was visibly struggling now, her breathing becoming slightly labored as the pressure mounted. I never said I wanted complete privacy. I said I wanted fair treatment and the right to control my own narrative instead of having it controlled by people with malicious intent. Malicious intent. Joy pounced on the phrase immediately. So everyone who questions your account has malicious intent? The palace staff, the British public, even people here in America who have concerns about your story, they're all acting with malicious intent. The question was expertly crafted to put Meghan in an impossible position. If she said yes, she would sound paranoid and defensive. If she said no, she would have to acknowledge that legitimate questions existed about her narrative. She chose a third option, deflection through outrage. This is incredible, she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. I'm being treated like a hostile witness instead of a guest. You've clearly made up your minds about me before I even walked in here. This isn't journalism. This is character assassination disguised as an interview. Whoopi's response was swift and devastating. Character assassination? We're asking you to back up claims you've made publicly. If questioning your story constitutes character assassination, then maybe the problem isn't with the questions. Maybe it's with the story itself. The studio fell silent except for the hum of cameras capturing every micro-expression on Meghan's face. She sat frozen for a moment, clearly realizing she had walked into a trap far more sophisticated than she had anticipated. The View's hosts had systematically dismantled her talking points, exposed contradictions in her narrative, and cornered her into a position where any response would make her look bad. But they weren't finished yet. What happened next would take the confrontation to a level that would have viewers talking for months to come. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Joy delivered the knockout blow that would define this confrontation forever. Meghan, let's talk about something that's been bothering a lot of people. You've positioned yourself as a champion for women's rights and equality, but you've also been accused of bullying female staff members at Kensington Palace. Multiple women came forward with these allegations. How do you square that circle? The question landed like a nuclear bomb. Meghan's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, and something that looked almost like panic. Her carefully maintained composure didn't just crack, it shattered completely. That is absolutely outrageous, she said, her voice shaking with fury. Those allegations were investigated and found to be, actually, They weren't, Sonny interrupted with prosecutorial precision. The investigation results were never made public. The palace simply said they had addressed the matter internally. That's not the same thing as being cleared, is it? Meghan's hands were visibly trembling now. I cannot believe you're bringing up unsubstantiated gossip as if it's fact. This is exactly the kind of treatment I've been talking about. No man would be subjected to this kind of character assassination based on anonymous accusations. Sarah leaned in for the kill. But they weren't anonymous, were they? We have names. We have specific incidents. Jason Knopf, your former communications secretary, filed an official complaint. Melissa Tawabti, your personal assistant, left her job citing the stress of working for you. These aren't faceless accusers. These are professional people who put their careers on the line to speak out. The mention of specific names and incidents had a devastating effect. Meghan looked genuinely trapped for the first time in the interview. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, and she began looking around as if searching for an escape route. "This is unconscionable," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're ambushing me with one-sided hit pieces." Whoopi moved in for the final blow with the authority of someone who had been in the business for decades. "Meghan, here's the bottom line. You've built your entire post-royal brand on being the victim of an unfair system. But what if you weren't just a victim? What if you were also a perpetrator? What if the real story is that you couldn't handle the pressure and expectations of royal life, so you lashed out at the people trying to help you, then blamed everyone else when it backfired?" The accusation hung in the air like a death sentence. Meghan stared at Whoopi with undisguised hatred, her facade of wounded dignity completely abandoned. "How dare you?" she said, her voice low and dangerous. "How dare you sit there and psychoanalyze me based on palace propaganda and tabloid gossip? You don't know me. You don't know what I went through. Then tell us," Joy challenged. "Stop deflecting and tell us your side of the bullying allegations. Explain why multiple women independently came forward with similar stories about your behavior. Make us understand." But Meghan was beyond rational explanation now. She was operating on pure emotion, and it was not pretty to watch. "I don't owe you an explanation for lies and smears. I don't have to sit here and be attacked by people who have already decided I'm guilty of whatever they want to accuse me of." The hosts exchanged glances. They had pushed their guest to the breaking point, and they knew it. But they also knew they were witnessing television history. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a complete meltdown happening in real time. Sonny delivered what would be the final question of the interview. "Meghan, you talk a lot about accountability and truth-telling. So here's your chance. Take accountability for your own actions. Admit that maybe, just maybe, you weren't the perfect victim you've portrayed yourself to be. Admit that you made mistakes, that you hurt people, that you bear some responsibility for how things went wrong." The request for accountability was the final straw. Meghan's eyes blazed with fury as she leaned forward in her chair. "I will not be lectured about accountability by a group of women who have built their careers on tearing down other women. This entire interview has been a setup from the beginning. You invited me here under false pretenses to humiliate me on national television. Nobody's humiliating you," Whoopi said calmly. "We're asking you to defend statements you've made publicly. If you can't handle that level of scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be making those statements in the first place." That was it. Meghan snapped completely. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm done with this," she announced, her voice carrying across the stunned studio. "I came here in good faith to have a conversation, and instead I've been subjected to a coordinated attack designed to destroy my reputation." The cameras captured every second as she began removing her microphone with shaking hands. "This is not journalism," she continued, her voice rising. "This is a hit job, and I will not participate in it for another second." Joy tried one last time to regain control of the situation. "Meghan, if you just sit back down, we can know." Meghan cut her off sharply. "I will not sit back down. I will not continue to be abused by people who have already made up their minds about me. This interview is over." The studio was in complete chaos now. Producers were frantically signaling from off-camera. Audience members were murmuring in shock, and the host sat in stunned silence as their guest prepared to make her dramatic exit. Meghan turned to face the cameras directly, her final words delivered with the fury of someone who felt completely betrayed. "To anyone watching this, Know that this is what happens when you try to speak truth to power. This is what happens when you challenge systems of oppression. They don't engage with your arguments. They try to destroy you personally. With that, she turned on her heel and walked off the set, leaving her microphone on the floor and the entire studio in stunned silence. The cameras followed her exit, capturing every step of her retreat until she disappeared behind the curtain. Whoopi was the first to recover, turning to face the camera with the professionalism of a veteran broadcaster. "Well, that was certainly unexpected," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos that had just unfolded. "When we come back, we'll discuss what just happened and get your thoughts on social media." As the show cut to commercial, the studio remained electric with tension. The hosts had gotten their explosive television moment, but at what cost? They had systematically dismantled their guest's narrative, exposed her contradictions, and pushed her to a complete emotional breakdown. On live television, the confrontation was over, but the fallout was just beginning. In a matter of minutes, clips of Meghan's dramatic exit would be circulating across every social media platform, analyzed and dissected by millions of viewers who had just witnessed one of the most explosive celebrity meltdowns in television history. The View had lived up to its reputation for fearless questioning, but they had also created a moment that would define both their show and their guest for years to come. It was television at its most raw and unfiltered, and absolutely nobody who watched it would ever forget what they had just witnessed.